to today's breakout session, Community Collaboration with the Faith Community and Community Networks. My name is Samantha Hidalgo, and I will be one of the facilitators for today's session. My co-facilitator is Autumn Carter. If you want to introduce yourself.
Hi,
Autumn
everyone.
today, oops, sorry, you go.
You're fine. I was just going to say hi anyway. Hi, everybody. My name is Autumn.
Autumn and I today will be facilitating. Autumn and I today will be hosting today's session, moderating the conversation and any comments that may come up. I want to let everybody know that they can either use the raise their hand function on Zoom or they can unmute themselves and ask a question. We don't have a lot of people here today, so I don't think it should be too much of an issue if people unmute themselves to ask questions or make comments. We should be getting joined by Pastor George Nicholas, who spoke earlier in today's presentations to help stimulate some conversation. But if anybody has any questions and they don't feel comfortable unmuting themselves, please, you can direct questions to either myself, Autumn, or you can put them in the chat for everybody to see if you're comfortable with that. We will be checking it periodically. Does anybody have any questions before we get started? I don't see Pastor Nicholas yet, so I'm just going to hold off, but there are some questions that we have kind of already drafted to help guide the conversation, but that doesn't mean anybody can contribute or ask further in-depth questions. It's really just so that we can get a better sense of today's conversation. So I thank you all for being here, for taking the time out of your Friday. I know Friday in the holiday season, there's probably a lot of things you'd rather be doing, but everybody being here today means a lot to both Autumn and myself and the AARP Foundation. So thank you very much. I'm just going to wait a few more minutes for Pastor Nicholas. Hello. Thank you for joining us, Pastor Nicholas. My name is Samantha. I'm my co-facilitator today, Autumn Carter, and I will be in this breakout session with you. Autumn and I actually are Buffalo natives and both attended the Igniting Hope Conference, both as audience members, and I actually helped facilitate, and Autumn was, I believe, a note taker for that one, correct?
Okay, yeah, great.
So we very much appreciated your contribution to today's AARP meeting. I think I can speak for both of us when I say we both recognized a lot of the neighborhoods that you discussed in your presentation and a lot of the health disparities that we see in Western New York and particularly in Buffalo. So thank you for your contributions. They definitely meant a lot to us.
Well, happy to do that, and I'm looking forward for us to have a conversation this session. Let's talk together and.
Do you mind just getting right into it? We only have until about 2:20, and then we have to move on to our finding solutions and results section of today. So if you're okay with it, let's get right into it.
Yeah.
So one more time, everybody. Today's topic is community collaboration with the faith community and community networks. So I think our first question is, given COVID-19's impact, how should communities be fortified to improve State Department of Health supports?
Now, do you want me to are we going to have a conversation, or you want me to just give my ideas, or how we want to do this?
I would love for you to give your ideas first, and then if anybody has any contributions or questions to please add on. This is not just time for Pastor Nicholas to just talk, although I'm sure you probably could answer all of these questions.
Dialogue again. So read the question one more time, please.
Sure. Given COVID-19's impact, how should communities be fortified to improve State Department of Health supports?
Well, I think the most important thing is to first understand what resources are available to your community from the state, right? And so there's contact tracing has begun through the state. We should have within your communities, community health centers that should have resources and information about these issues. And then your municipal health department, for us, Erie County, making sure that whatever information that the county health departments, whatever they have available, make sure that information is available in your community, right? Because sometimes information is created, things happen, and then somehow that information doesn't come into your community. So make sure that you access those spaces. And then once you get that information, just don't hold it to yourself. Make sure that if you're able to, let's say you find some good information about some things for your community, reach out to some of your colleagues, reach out to others and say, hey, are you aware of this? This is information that I found out that is going to be helpful for our community. I want to share that with you, because a lot of times it's difficult to find something. So when you find that nugget, don't hold on to it by yourself. Make sure that you share with your colleagues.
I think those are great recommendations. Does anybody else who may not necessarily be from Western New York or live in the same communities as Pastor Nichols and Autumn and I do? Yeah, I see Nancy Smith, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, Nancy Smith, I'm in Syracuse and do a lot of work with SUNY Upstate. And I guess what we're kind of facing now, especially with older African Americans in our geriatric practice, is how do we help people make the decisions, look at the pros and cons, and make their own decision about the vaccine? And I'm wondering where the faith communities are in how they're representing this to their congregations. On the one hand, we want everyone to be vaccinated. On the other hand, people need to have choice based on the best information they have and their personal circumstances, right? So I'm just wondering how we all walk the line. I do know that there's an effort at Upstate to try to create sort of a decision tool, that helps people look at and, consider the options, but it's a balancing act.
Yeah, so one of the things that we're doing, and like I said, we're organizing a conversation with some faith leaders and Dr. Alan Lessie, who's an epidemiologist at the University of Buffalo, who is an expert and he's part of our task force. So he's been with us from the beginning. And he'll share what information he has about it, but also more importantly, offer an opportunity for people to ask questions about about the pending vaccine. We have to create spaces for people to ask the questions that they have, and also to value whatever their fears or trepidation is about this vaccine, and not be dismissive of those things, right? So the easiest thing to say is, well, that's ridiculous. You need to get that vaccine. No, a person's trepidation and their fears and their concerns about this vaccine is real. And if you feel like it's really important for them to change their views on getting the vaccine, if they choose not to get it, then you have to answer their questions. You have to find out, okay, what is it that is preventing you, or what is it that makes you feel like this vaccine won't be harmful? And you have to talk about those things, right? And so oftentimes people are just dismissed when they say, well, if you don't get the vaccine, you're just going to die, right? That's not the way we need to respond. We need to hear people, and then we need to have the ability to answer their questions that they may have around this vaccine.
I'll just add that I think trust across the board is a huge concern.
Yeah, and I have trust issues as it relates to it. I'll be real honest with you. There's I need to know more than what the pharmaceutical companies are saying, right? You can't. I would say this: don't go by just what they say. What they say has to be verified in some way, that by some entity that doesn't have a financial interest in their claims, right? And that, I think that's very, very important, because this is happening quickly, and those in the medical profession know that these vaccines don't usually come this quick. And so we need to be careful, in terms of making sure that we get all the information that we need before we start lining people up.
And we're talking a week and a half max, I mean, when they start to be available, at least for frontline workers.
Right. So, I mean, and I think the labor movement, I know I see Asim on there. I mean, I think, the people from SEIU and others are probably going to really want to get a lot of information before they start recommending their membership. I don't know.
Does anybody else have any other comments they want to add to how faith-based networks can better support State Department of Health efforts and vice versa?
This is Susan Grinslade. I just want to add to that to address your comment earlier, Nancy. I think trust is a huge issue. It's going to be, probably the thing that needs to be addressed first when we start to think about vaccination. And I think from my experience with communities, we need to take the conversation into the community, into spaces that they feel safe, where they can ask questions. And if that's their church, that's fine. If it's a community center or a school, but give them that opportunity to ask those questions so that they can get the information ahead of time and have time to think about it in terms of making a decision. And I think furthermore, I think we need to make a concerted effort to make the vaccine available in the community and not expect individuals to go to a health department, which they may not trust, and may not have the access to do that, et cetera, et cetera. But if we want to reach the community, I think we need to take it to the community.
Thank you, Susan and Nancy. Those were really excellent points to bring up in this conversation. Does everyone feel ready to move on to the next question, or do you have anything else you would like to add? All right, let's move on to the next one. So this is our discussion centering question. What has been the impact of COVID-19 on faith community and community organizations, families, access to food, clothing, education, transportation, delivery services, mental health services, and access to COVID-19 testing and flu vaccine? That was a lot. So we can break that up into different sections. But just to reiterate some of what that question was asking. So what has been the impact on faith community and community organizations, families, access to food, clothing, education, transportation, delivery services, mental health services, and access to COVID-19 testing and flu vaccine? So does anybody want to start in a particular part of that question? We can talk about how faith communities kind of interact with all of the second part of the question, but I'll leave that up to you guys.
Well, I'll get started. I see it's been positive in terms of the work that we've been able to do out of the coalition, right? That we've been able to build relationships to help enhance access to testing, access to food, access to clothing, and then through our COVID-19 response project to stand up food pantries in churches when there weren't food pantries in some of them before, or in our case, at our church at Lincoln, expand our food pantry so that it's able to meet the needs that have arisen as it relates to COVID-19. So taking some of the resources that have been invested in community and then making them available to some churches who already have a natural constituency or even served within their community that's not necessarily their membership, and making sure those entities have resources. And so we've done a pretty good job of that in Buffalo in terms of getting resources to people who need them. Can we do better? Sure. But I think on the positive side, what has happened is it's almost forced alliances and collaborations and working arrangements with entities that maybe weren't working together before COVID, but now this has kind of pushed some folks together so that we can maximize the resources to meet the needs of the people within the community. So that's kind of from how I look at it from what we've been doing in Buffalo. But I'm
I think, yeah, I think as someone who's lived in Buffalo throughout this pandemic, who was living in the suburbs and then moved back into the city limits, I've seen a lot of collaboration on levels that I didn't necessarily expect to see it, which is really good, but it's also kind of disheartening to think like, why were these things never in place before? Why did it take the global pandemic for us to finally care about certain communities and certain neighborhoods and think, does my neighbor have enough food to eat? You know, why did it take a whole pandemic for that? But I want to read a comment from the chat, if it's all right with you, Asim. It highlighted the need for mutual aid in communities to provide resources for communities, especially those in our community that have been essential workers during this pandemic. Yeah, I think we've seen a really large spotlight on frontline workers and essential workers, and kind of what the word essential means, and how your being an essential person can impact your health within the pandemic. You know, you putting yourself at risk to get a job that the community considers essential. So does anybody else want to talk about that? We can move on to a different section of the question. So I'm really interested.
Actually, if I could,
yeah, absolutely, go for it.
I think what I see is the challenges, mothers, let's say necessity is the mother of invention, right? I think we've all seen our organizations, our churches turn on a dime, right? Like, healthcare providers turn on a dime. And I agree, I think I've seen a lot more collaboration too, but how do we keep that going? At least in our city, I don't think we have the level of collaboration that you have, Pastor, and I'm very envious of what you've built in Buffalo. And it may be going on in Syracuse, and I'm just not aware of it. And I look forward to, spending some time with Colette and learning more. I could just be oblivious, and that's part of the problem, right? Many of us that are in positions to do something are oblivious. So I think that's going to be the challenge is I just don't want us to get comfortable again.
Well, I think what we've gone through, we'll never go back to what was before this. I mean, this is a pivotal point in this nation's history, right? And so I think once, the pandemic is calmed down a little bit, I think we'll have great opportunities to utilize the relationships we've developed to begin to start working on more systemic issues, right? So we recognize that when COVID-19 came, there was communities and there were gaps that were exposed. So now that, once we get through that, now the challenge is to keep people around the table to talk about, how the systems that we function in created those gaps and how do we prevent them from continuing on. And I think it's all about relationship building, Nancy. I mean, I think it's just, we have to just develop relationships across ethnicity and class and everything else. And we just have to begin to build those relationships. One of the reasons why we were able to respond so well in Buffalo is because we had built those relationships before the pandemic. If we wouldn't have built those relationships prior to it, then we would not have been able to achieve half the stuff that we were able to do.
I think something that Autumn and I can probably relate to because we actually did it. The organization that we both work for, Erie Niagara AHEC, did a packet distribution of health literacy and PPE information in the 14215 zip code. I want to say at the end of August, right? It's been so long. And one of the things that I saw in the community consistently was people were so thankful for PPE. I mean, this was months after people were worried that nobody but doctors was going to get it. Like, we were well into the pandemic and people were still having PPE concerns, but you weren't really hearing that on the news anymore. And then actually listening and talking to community members, they were so thankful. They were like, we didn't know what we were going to do when our kids started school because we don't have enough masks in the household. Or seeing people wearing dirty, probably should have already been disposed PPE was just like unbelievable to me. And if we hadn't taken the time to distribute that information and to distribute those tools, then I really do worry if the health disparities in the 14215 zip code would have been a lot worse.
There's no question they would have been. There's no question.
Anybody else have anything they'd like to share in regards to this question? There are a lot of points to this question. We can talk about access to food, clothing, education, transportation. Some of you are not from Buffalo, so your transportation systems may have been very differently affected than ours were. Delivery services. I know a lot of concerns about the post office shutting down, being defunded, and the election by mail. So there's a lot to unpack there as well. Mental health, flu, vaccine. We kind of talked about the vaccine a little bit already.
Well, we're having a lot of challenges now as it relates to education, and where we, the virtual learning has been a real challenge, especially for children in urban environments, because of the challenges as it relates to broadband and internet access. As well as, many children who, especially in the Buffalo Public Schools, who are behind grade level anyway before this even happened, right? And so one of the things that's been positive, again, is that many churches and other community-based organizations have opened up their spaces and we stood up these virtual learning centers, right? And so that some people would have a place to take their child that would have the kind of internet access and others, so they can do that work. And so all those things you see on those questions they're all issues about resources and access, but they're also issues of connecting resources that are available to spaces where they weren't available prior to. And again, that's all about relationship building, really. It sounds simplistic, but it is. That's what it is.
It's true. And I think what you said earlier really rings true with a lot of the issues that we've been discussing today. How do we continue these relationships to make systemic change after the pandemic's over, after we have, 50 or 60, 70, 80, 90% of our population vaccinated? How do we ensure that, should we ever need to do virtual learning or literally anything virtual again, that the students, not only in Buffalo, but within New York State and within the country are better supported? I always make the argument that I think internet should be a utility, just like electricity or water or garbage. It took federal intervention in the 1930s for houses to have electricity. It was also something to stimulate the economy in the Great Depression, and I don't see why we can't do the same thing again. I think it's going to take state and federal intervention to really make internet a viable option for everyone. I think part of the issue too is there's a competitive market, and we always want, because we live in a capitalistic society, we always want someone's pockets to be filled. But I think we have to take a step back and realize that internet is a necessity right now. Both of my sisters, one's in high school, one's in middle school, and since Erie County got pushed to, I believe, an orange zone where they live, it's 24 hours a day internet, like nothing that they do is in person except for when I see them. So for them to be on Zoom meetings and Google Classrooms, and to know that there's thousands of other kids that are like them that don't have the better internet that my parents were able to upgrade to because my dad works for Verizon, it's just ridiculous in my opinion. But anybody else want to say anything about that?
I'm actually doing a lot of work in technology right now in policy change, and I think it just needs to get done. And I encourage you to look at Philadelphia and what they've done with Comcast as a sole source provider. And they cut through a lot of stuff in a couple of years. And the city is better off, and people of all incomes are better off and have better access. I think pushing it to be a utility, we're going to come up against barriers if we use that word. But I think we could get there without using that word. So I think it's absolutely priority. The other point I was going to make, and I'm sorry to over participate, but I think we have seen, usually as you can't do that, or we've never done it that way, right? In my experience, I have seen it's okay. Regulators loosening up regulations, not looking the other way. Funders saying you've got another year's extension. People making allowances, policies being tweaked or being changed, or especially on the regulatory side. I hope we don't lose that flexibility. I hope we learn from the value of that flexibility, because so often, right, it's bureaucracy that stops good stuff from happening. And we don't have time for it.
Yeah, but Nancy, we didn't have time for it before the pandemic, right? And so, there are communities, when you look at the data, that were and continue to suffer because of the inequities within our society. And a lot of those inequities are driven by, how resources are deployed, who makes those decisions on and how much and where resources are invested and deployed. And those are the kinds of structural issues that, we have to tackle as a community, right? The COVID-19 has exposed just the vast inequities and how disproportionate Black and brown people are suffering in this culture. And so we have to go back, and as you mentioned, Nancy, the bureaucracy or what have you, and we have to re-examine, and if things need to be dismantled, if we have to use language like making broadband a utility, and if we feel by using that language it's a barrier, then let's talk about why you think people, not you, but why people think it's a barrier, as opposed to if it's to me, it's a justice issue, right? You can't, in this technological age, for children not to have access to, the internet, it puts them at a distinct disadvantage versus children who have that, right? And so who is responsible for closing that gap, right? And so I think we have to really take this moment to really re-examine the whole structure of our society and how we can make it more equitable. And it's going to be difficult, but it's necessary.
I think you're absolutely right, Pastor. And I think with the time that we have left, we can shift our conversation more towards, which we've already been talking about, solutions to some of these issues. Nika, if you could go to the next slide. I think it says, so what have been solutions that we've already seen? What are solutions we hope to see? What new policies or innovations are necessary to improve a shift in community supports that will drive livability solutions and stabilize hardest hit communities? So, I mean, we've kind of already been talking about these, but if we want to draw like the next half of our time together onto some of these points, I think that will leave us in a really good spot for the next session. So I know that one of the things I wanted to ask you, Pastor, was do you think that, kind of going back to Nancy's earlier point about vaccinations within the community and building trust, that town hall style meetings are a good way to get connected to people? I mean, not so much face-to-face, but like virtual ones. What do you think, kind of in the pandemic that we're in, what are the best ways to build trust within a community?
Well, I think there has to be identifying, every community has natural leaders, right? And those leaders may be block club presidents, they may be pastors, they may be just somebody that is just been in that community and people just trust. And those people have to be engaged and equipped with the type of information that is necessary to communicate to the community the truth and the reality about the vaccinations, right? And as Dr. Grinsley said, there has to be a sense where there is a coming to or coming within community and coming into those spaces to have these conversations, whether they be virtual, whether they're in person or what have you, based on safety. But there has to be some intentionality, right, in terms of sharing information, equipping people who are within this community. When you think about as it relates to healthcare, You know, there are doctors, the community health, from speaking from Buffalo, but I'm sure the same across the state. But there are doctors like Dr. Vasquez, Dr. Glick, Dr. Lusu. There's Levon Ansari in the Community Health Center of Western New York, who prior to the pandemic, they were providing healthcare services in these communities, right? And so they have to be fully engaged in this process because they're already dealing with that patient population. They know the patient population, and so we can't have entities coming from outside, you know, and say, okay, here we're going to give you all these vaccines. You got to utilize the people who are already working with that patient population and equip them in doing this work.
I want to remind everyone, if they have, this is not just Pastor Nichols' time to talk about solutions. If you think you have anything to contribute, whether it's small or large, please, I encourage you to bring those points. We can talk about them. We are Buffalo natives, so if you know of a solution that would work where you're from, please share with us, because this whole topic is all about livability, and livability doesn't just mean one thing to one community. So I encourage you all to share.
I know some of y'all on this thing, so I'm gonna start calling out names because I know y'all got something to say.
We can talk about some of the solutions. We kind of spoke about them earlier, to broadband and internet, education access, and how those might relate to faith-based networks. Excuse me, that's a tongue twister. Anybody have any other suggestions? Maybe think of the roles that you play within your community. If you're not necessarily involved in a faith system. Oh, I see a comment. Asim said, there's been an increase in the upcoming state budget towards healthcare funding as COVID relief federal dollars are on the way. I think that can definitely be a solution. Is where we put those dollars, I think that really matters. One of the things I don't think a lot of people were expecting were budget cuts and a lot of layoffs as the pandemic kind of took its toll on the country and on the state. And so I think while it's great that the state is increasing its healthcare budget, what are the ways in which we're going to see that money go to where it needs to be? So does anyone have any suggestions on where they think a good chunk or any chunk of that money should go? It could be anywhere. Personally, I think communities that have historically had horrible health disparities is an area that we should be focusing on. I think we've kind of seen that theme throughout today's meeting about the issues that were previously being addressed to the pandemic were only made worse by the pandemic, and why we still need to continue looking at them after the pandemic. So areas like 14215 zip code. Nancy, I don't know the zip codes that have the greatest health disparities in the Syracuse area, but I'm sure you could probably think of a few, maybe those areas, getting community health centers set up there, really utilizing community health lay workers, people who are not necessarily trained health professionals, but are trained to assist health professionals in whatever it is that they need. So if that's helping the community set up doctor's appointments, if that's helping community members, teaching them how to use medical tools like blood sugar test kits, things like that, I think we could probably use a lot of state funds could probably go to that. We would see much better health outcomes. But I'm interested to see if anybody else has any ideas in terms of state budget.
Well, Samantha, I mean, one of the issues is you know, resources, and I'm looking at you talking about budgets, right? People, you know, one simple thing is people need another major stimulus payment from the federal government, right? And so all this talk about, you know, when you hear small businesses and others saying, well, you know, we don't want to shut down our business, and, you know, and we want to do all these things, and you know, I understand that, and so there is a solution to this stuff, right? And it's for the federal government to provide the kind of stimulus dollars to not only help individuals, we want to help individuals, but and also small businesses, so people can take that pause, they can step back and do the things that they need to do in terms of social distancing, shutting down, or what have you. And so that's a key thing, that we need a major infusion of resources into communities so that people can get through this situation. And and the dollars are there. I mean, you know, I hate when people talk about, well, where is it going to come from? Well, the federal government, that's our government, right? And you know, the monies that we spend up, you know, in terms of the military and all this other stuff, there's money. It's just a matter of whether or not they want to invest that money into the people. And so I think that's a major thing that has to happen. I mean, it should have happened a couple months ago. People are hurting, and they need resources, and these resources have to be made available. We pay taxes, and you know, this is what we pay taxes for. So, you know, there's no point in being the quote unquote the greatest nation in the world, the wealthiest nation in the world, or all this other stuff that people want to say, if you're not going to use that wealth and power to help people. So what good is it? And so, you know, and these are the things as it relates to the church or the faith communities, these are the things that the faith community should be having, that kind of voice in the public square to say, you know, we'll do the food pantry stuff, we'll do all the things, but how do we reconcile in a nation where, you know, in some communities we've seen people lined up, you know, for miles in cars just to get food. At the same time, we read that the stock market is at all-time high, and and wealthy people have actually made money off of this pandemic, right? We got to reconcile that in some spaces and figure out a way that's out of balance. And you know, this is a faith community thing, and as faith leaders, there's no, I shouldn't say there's no, but there, you know, as we look at things through a spiritual lens or a faith lens, there's nothing moral and just about, you know, a community where there are few with too much and too many without enough, right? And the faith community can't just be silent upon that and say, well, you know, that's just the way. No, it's not the way things are, or it's not the way they should be. And so there has to be that shifting because people are suffering, they're hurting. And this is
I think
not
you're
about.
absolutely right in that, and it's very angering. I think for a lot of us to see that people, you know, billionaires got more billions, and we were given, not even all of us were given $1,200 to use for the last 6 months. Like, that's pretty awful. So I want to shift gears just a little bit because we don't have a lot of time left, and I have this slide and one more slide to get through. So we'll kind of go through them a little bit quickly and then give some final thoughts at the end. So what about data and its use in strengthening housing and community development strategies, that will increase livability and stabilize neighborhoods? So I think this question's kind of getting at what can we take from what we have right now? We kind of talked about data earlier and how it's always been there. People always have it, but how can we utilize it to strengthen housing and community development strategies and kind of increase livability? I think one of the things that we could probably definitely use are hospital records. Where are people coming from when they go to hospitals? What is it, is if there is anything that we can invest into these communities so people aren't high utilizers in hospitals. I think I kind of take it from a medical perspective because I'm involved in public health, but I'm interested if anybody else has anything they want to add.
I am an absolute great believer in data-based decision-making, but I also think that data can become an excuse to delay what we all know needs to happen. I'm working with a coalition right now, and they want a lot of data on basic needs. And I'm going, we all know what they are. There's been enough surveys. Really, we're over surveyed. We have the data. We know what the issues are. Let's talk about how to fix them. So I just think we got to be careful. If it can be useful for something as specific as you just described, that's great. Hospitals know that. I mean, they have that data now. So if it's tactical, I think that's great. If it's to inform discussions at this level where we already know what needs, I think largely what needs to be done, I think it delays action.
So what do you think drives that, Nancy, that delay in action?
You know, here's my favorite example of this. I started a clinical information exchange, right? Healthy Connections up in Syracuse. And when it came to make a decision around the table, and we had hospitals, doctors, but 51% of the board were employers, businesses. So when it came to the decision to invest $2 or $3 million to get this thing going, the docs and hospitals whose pockets were about to get emptied, right? Because it's a savings, were saying, you know, we need to study this more. And the people who were paying for it, businesses, said, no, we make harder decisions every single day. So I don't know how that translates in our current situation, but we need to have people that are, you know, brave enough to say, no, we just need to make decisions now. So I don't know how that translates into, issues of inequity and institutionalized racism. That, sometimes I woke up this morning thinking we just have to have a change in leadership. We have good leadership in Syracuse, but they're the wrong color. And they're doing a good job to try to diversify our leadership, but to me, that's an important step before anything can really be done. But anyway, you've inspired me to really think more in the work I do about the faith community and the role that perhaps they are the business people that can say, stop, we just need to do this.
Nancy, I think your last comment kind of ushers in the last literally 3 minutes that we have. I'm going to ask this question very quickly. What about community health workers, faith community ministries, and missions and programs, and providing/developing training and supports and resources to undergird, and drive innovation? I see a comment from Martha. SUNY Upstate Medical Center, Dr. Stephen Thomas has been named head of the National COVID vaccine vetting team. So here in Syracuse, we are very focused on its equitable distribution. Upstate already has doctors providing care on site to homeless. Yes, love that. Several local faith and social justice organizations are already mobilized to remediate the social damage caused and racial inequities revealed by slicing through Black neighborhoods by I-81. In the 1950s, urban renewal, the New York State Department of Transportation's design for highways replacement, will not repeat these mistakes because of these grassroots efforts. The same communities will swing in to assist vaccine distribution equitably. That was a lot, but I really liked what you had to say, Martha. I think
Martha, thank you.
That was really good. I think what Nancy said too about people kind of undervaluing or not always thinking about the connection between faith-based networks and communities when it comes to health issues. I think a lot of times they try to separate the two when in actuality, they're very much entwined. If you have a really strong support faith system, and correct me if I'm wrong, Pastor, but you talk about things like your health, you talk about your family, you talk about the things that are going on in your life, and if someone can help you, they tend to help. So those are does anyone else have any final thoughts? I know we didn't really get to touch the last question too much, but I feel like we'd already kind of discussed it in some of the other things that we did. If not, I'm going to let you guys go ahead to our last breakout session of the day. I believe we're just going to be talking about the solutions that we discussed towards the end of the meeting. So I thank all of you, especially Pastor Nicholas, because you really took it places I was really hoping we would go, and we did. So thank you everybody for attending, and I'll see you in the next session.
Great job.